Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Lisa Howie. I'm the director of Black Pony Gallery. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Lisa Howie. I'm the director of Black Pony Gallery. Sorry, let's turn that off. Excuse me. I'm the director of Black Pony Gallery and the founder of the Atlantic World Art Fair. Thank you to Artsy for hosting us this year for our inaugural iteration and for the support of lead sponsor Butterfield. Big thank you to the 8 participating galleries and curatorial agencies for sharing in the vision and for adding a dimensional quality to the fair with a robust program of art talks and panel discussions. In alphabetical order, we are Frame Center Jamaica, Gallery Alma Blau in Curacao, Galerie Monin in Haiti, Olympia Gallery Jamaica, ReadyTex Art Gallery Suriname, Sourgrass Barbados, Susie Wong Presents Jamaica, and Turn Gallery in the Bahamas. As a result of our collective work, we now have a reference point where we can return to the art talks and panel discussions on YouTube. And of course, we have the catalog of the 283 artworks that were featured in the fair that will live on Artsy indefinitely. This is important because to have those 2 resources will enable us to continue to develop our relationships with new audiences. Thank you especially to all of the participating artists. It is your creative talents that we champion. Please press on with your projects and stay strong in the face of the current challenges and uncertainties. I'm grateful for everyone who participated in the program. We've had some exceptional people, all of whom have devoted their time and energy pro bono, and everyone's collective commitment to the vision of the Atlantic World Art Fair is so uplifting and confirming. So thank you so much. Today, I have the pleasure of spending a few minutes with 2 curators who I respect immensely, Dr. Marsha Pearce and Paulo Miyada. If you guys want to come on up to the stage. Dr. Marsha Pearce is a lecturer and visual arts unit coordinator in the Department of Creative and Festival Arts at the University of West Indies St. Augustine campus. And her latest curatorial projects that you can check out, one still ongoing called Caribbean Insecurities, a digital group exhibition, and one recently concluded, No Words, a solo exhibition that was installed in Port of Spain, Trinidad. Paulo Miyada is the chief curator at the Institute Tomie Ohtake in São Paulo since 2015, and he is adjunct curator for the 34th iteration of the Biennial de São Paulo, which is slated to open in September. Thank you both so much for being here. Your theme for your biennial, though it's dark and yet I sing, feels very much apropos for the Atlantic World Art Fair. And I find that your choices, both of you, for the intellectual capital that you want to develop in your conversations today, I think they're just so on point. Today, we will be reviewing the fair through their lenses, where Marsha will extend her thoughts from a reference to Derek Walcott's 1992 Normal Lecture, and Paulo will present his ideas with consideration of Edouard Glissant's Poetics of Relation. We're going to start with Marsha and her series of selected works and conversation. We will banter as we can. Then we will switch to Paulo, and he will present his findings and ideas. And again, we'll come back to some open conversation. So please feel free to put your comments and questions into the comment space, and we'll do our best to attend to those. This is slated for 30 minutes, but I have a feeling we're going to go over a little bit, so please enjoy. Marsha.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be joining you and Paulo for this closing reception. I thought I would start, as you've mentioned, with a quote from Derek Walcott as a way of framing my contribution to our conversation this morning. And if we can get that quote up on the screen. And so Walcott says, there is a territory wider than the limits made by the map of an island, which is the illimitable sea and what it remembers. All of the Antilles, every island is an effort of memory. This inaugural edition of the Atlantic World Art Fair focused on mid-Atlantic islands, but a critical aspect of this art fair is its vision, its reframing of place and our memories as something broader, deeper and nuanced. And so instead of thinking about what divides us, The way, for example, the Atlantic Ocean comprises many seas, the Caribbean Sea, Mediterranean Sea, Baltic Sea, and so on. This art fair reminds us of a bigger picture, that the Atlantic touches many shores, and we often forget that interconnectedness. And so I see memory, therefore, playing a key role in how we shift our ways of seeing and how we reconsider our relationships with each other. I think, too, that in seeking to give visibility to artists who are often omitted from art world and art market conversations, the fair also invites us to remember that there is creative territory beyond what is known and typically spotlighted. And so memory is an important foundation for the art fair, in my view, and memory has emerged as a key theme in many of the artworks presented. If we can go to Lavon Bell's piece, I will take us through some of my selections. Great. So Lavon Bell's Storm, How to Imagine the Tropicalia as Monumental, as a Memory. We see Bell using collage here as what I call a methodology for remembering, for piecing together new conceptions of space and time, re-envisioning land, sea, and self as colossal phenomena. Let's have a look at Jade Hassel, her piece, Walking Our Boundaries. Again, we're thinking about territory, but we're also, keeping this notion of memory in mind. And so her avatars are vessels that aid in an enlarging of self as territory. She uses these avatars as ways of spanning space and time. Her figures are a way of thinking beyond limits. The treatment of the eyes draw attention to notions of the gaze. But whose gaze matters? Her works are less about an outward gaze and more about looking inward to memory as a resource for self-determination and self-making. If we have a look now at Deborah Jack's work, great. And so we see here an entitled Looking Out from her series, What is the Value of Water if it doesn't quench our thirst for? And Jack considers the idea of unmappable territories. Again, the notion of territory coming up. And she does this by looking at the space where water and the shoreline meet. As part of her investigation, she questions how nature deals with memory. In this particular image, we see a bunch of flowers, a young girl holding a bunch of flowers. This flower only blooms 1 month out of the year in St. Martin. And so the flowers represent memory in Jack's work. Jack is interested in the ways nature, in its seasonality, performs a kind of recall, a return or bringing back. How nature can serve as a reminder or memorial for our traumatic history. Let's have a look at Anina Major's work. Great. We have Seasoned Rice Pot. Major's work draws on memory in a different way. It draws on her memory of the Afro-Bahamian tradition of plaiting straw, taught to her by her grandmother. So in this personal recollection, she brings attention to the vulnerability of the island's collective memory, since this practice of making with straw is threatened by the importation of foreign items. And so we have, this notion of the personal and the collective coming into play in Major's work. If we move on to Whitehead and Class, we have Tessa Whitehead's Breadfruit Body and Ronaldo Class's Safe Place to Be. In these works, the artist combined the body with animals and the land, expanding self in this sense. This kind of dialogue between the natural world and the body is strong in the art fair and invites us to think about what the natural world represents. I mentioned a little bit about that when we looked at Deborah Jack's work. But we can think about the natural world as a lasting witness or memory bank that has endured history. To combine the body with the natural world, in a sense, therefore, is to think about our relationship with memory. Furthermore, the natural environment in the Caribbean has historically been exploited, mapped, and studied by others. We need to know it for ourselves, to remember the land, to remember our natural world. And so memory figures in such a critical way there. Others thinking about the body and the natural world include Jory Minaya and Ronald Cyril, and I believe we have an image of Cyril's work. Because as I refer to Cyril, And we see his aquatique there. I'm also thinking about the way a number of the artists in the fair gesture toward an approach that may be described as magic realism. And we can also see a piece by Alessandro Suriel. I think there's a slide with him as well. We have Alessandro's, great. And so these examples, they show that the aesthetic approach of magic realism is significant for us to consider, given that artists are interrogating complex histories, attempting to articulate new realities, new spaces of knowing, and trying to visualize or represent memory, which can be slippery. Author Maggie-Ann Bowers says magic realism offers a way to disrupt fixed categories of truth, reality, and history, and that magic realism creates a space beyond authoritative discourse where the unrepresentable can be expressed. And I think that that is so relevant for us to think about in the context of the Caribbean. Magic realism, therefore, can be understood as a critical way of approaching memory, of expressing memory. So what I have done here, hopefully, is that I've shared some examples of how memory is invoked and engaged in diverse ways in this art fair. In sharing, my aim has been to highlight how these artists attend to, and let me return to Walcott's phrase, an effort at memory. Thank you.
And it's interesting because, we, as a body of work of these 280 artworks, you've just crafted an exhibition within the context of a fair, which is so eloquent. And, this reimagining that you've just described, this shift in the paradigm, this is all that we're trying to actually incorporate in this fair, in the bigger picture experience, right, is to be able to showcase these talents and almost like bend the frame and box or space that's been shaped around our region or our islands or our perceptive cultures, and kind of really break out of that. And no, I absolutely agree with you that there is a common thread through it. The magical realism, surrealism was commented in the opening reception by Isolde Brillmeyer and Franklin Sermans as well. That was something that really stuck out for them, that there was a particular quality or nuance in the works that spoke to them in a way that, really shifts in and away and out of the region and becomes much more kind of just the global discourse.
Yeah.
I did really like how you when you get into memory, for me, Marsha, I see a lot through the works as well around this really interesting perception of time, and that the artists are at once nostalgic but also referential futurist, and that there's a really interesting play on time, I think, in many of the artists' projects that, for me as an art collector too, I find quite compelling.
Yeah, no, you're right, and I think that's what an approach like magic realism allows. It's being able to have that, of your feet in many realities, so to speak. So one foot is in the reality that we quote unquote know, but it allows us to sort of disrupt that knowledge and to be able to place or situate ourselves in alternate realities, which of course are not just spatial, but they're also temporal. So I think, as I said, that sort of aesthetic allows us to be able to think of ourselves as shifting between space and time, and to explore, knowledge that can come out of these, simultaneous modes of being and existing.
Paolo, did you want to add something?
No, I also, well, as you will see soon, I also felt it was interesting that what caught Marsha's eye didn't overlap with the things that brought my attention initially. But when I look at again to what she brought emphasis to, I could also relate a lot.
And we see in terms of the comments, Serenan Art making a reference to one of our famous literature pieces from Gabriel Garcia Marquez, one of our famous writers in the region. It always amuses me that the biggest praise for my work comes for the imagination, while the truth is that there's not a single line in all my work that does not have a basis in reality. The problem is that Caribbean reality resembles the wildest imagination. Love that. What a difficult situation for us. Well, let's move on then, Paulo, please, to, thank you, Marsha. Let's please move on to your slide deck, and so we'll just continue our conversation.
Thank you. And so what I would like to introduce you to is to the notion that by visiting the Atlantic World Art Fair, I got to the sense that even though we are discussing an online platform that supposedly is kind of happening anywhere, everywhere, or nowhere, actually I could feel how it is to be a foreigner visitor to a fair or to an exhibition context, even though I was online, because I was seeing most of the artists I didn't knew about before. I haven't been to all the places where they come from, and but I could see there was a conversation. It's a little bit like getting to a party and you see that people know each other and they are having a conversation, but are not really inside it yet. But still, when you hear a little bit of the shattering, even though you're not familiar with the people, you cannot you feel like you can connect. You feel like they are talking about things that you are also interested, or that you have been talking with different people for a while. So my effort was to avoid Googling too much, avoid researching outside of the platform too much. A little bit I couldn't avoid, I have to say, but as most as I could, I tried to stick with the experience of going through the image, the artworks, the information, and the testimonials when the galleries brought together testimonials by the artists about statements by the artists about their works. I really tried to pay attention and look for relations inside the Atlantic World Art Fair platform. And after going back and forth the fair, I got back to the feeling that in the middle of so many things that I could be losing in translation, of course, because when you are familiar with the work, you always tend to see through some layers and to bring different knowledge and background information. So I'm sure I was losing things in translation, but I was also being able to grasp a sense of connection between the works and between them and my own experience. And as a reader of Edouard Glissant, I was immediately recalled that relation is not something that depends on or relies on an absolute understanding of the other. That relation is not something that depends on transparency or relies on a complete identification between readers and listeners and speakers, but something that depends on a certain level of expectation of translation and an acknowledgement that the full translation is a myth. And in many cases, the complete translation is not only a myth, but it's a violent objective. So by respecting the opacity of the relations in place, that in a sense would be there even if I was familiar with everyone, even if I was born and raised in any of the countries, the islands that comprise this conversation, that some level of opacity would still be in place, and artistic experience and poetical experience are very effective in raising our acknowledgement of this opacity. And at the same time, I was also thinking or considering that in the end, the Brazilian formation of society and culture and language might be closer to the Caribbean region, specifically, and the Atlantic world, as you say, generally, than with the formation of a country like Portugal that was the colonizer of Brazil. Of course, Portugal is more directly implicated in Brazilian history, but if you think about the analogies of the process of formation, we are much closer to you than to them, so to say. And with all of this in mind, I went through the works again, and these are the ones I brought to point out some things that caught my attention. So if we can turn on the slides, we will go very briefly. So we have Glisten, with a quote that Lisa kindly selected for our conversation. And it's all about well, we were talking, Marsha was talking about magical realism, and we also have the discussion on the imaginaire in Glissant, which is not only like in the surrealists, it's not only the dream world, but it's also our capacity. The imaginaire is almost like a machine of building understanding about the world, about what can be, what will be, what would be, what could be, and what shouldn't be anymore. So the imaginaire is something very powerful in Glissant's writing, and it's good that we go through these works with that in mind. So if we can move on, you will notice that I chose to have exactly the prints from the website to share with you how I connected to the works, how they were presented to me. And what I want to point out is that sometimes what feels abstract, what feels opaque, or what feels not regionally or contextually specific might in the end be carrying a whole idea about a struggle, about conflict, and about uprising. So we can move on. Even in something that appears as something very abstract and very schematic, there might be a narration about the memory of a conflict, of a war, of missing dear people, and of being isolated. Then we move on. And as Marsha was speaking of the gaze, at points, the most accurate portrait of someone, the most accurate representation of a person might be the one that emphasizes that person opacity, that person protection against the colonial or the male or the Eurocentric gaze. Then we move on. The back of someone might be their strongest portrait. Move on. And by wrapping someone, you might not only be protecting that person, but also reinforcing her or his or their connection to their environment, to the place where they belong, or to the place that they want to be engaged with. Move on. So something that appears as some sort of prison can also be some sort of armor or protection. And we move on. And what feels like something that was improvised or precariously put together might be actually a fortress. And we move on. Might be something protecting someone from prejudice and from violence. And we move on. And with that in mind, what appears to be just a quotidian scene or a day-to-day point of life might resurface as a place of negotiation of subjectivities, of negotiation of different agendas that have the public space as a place of selective appearance. We move on. And reinforced by these strategies of opacity, by these strategies of hiding in order to re-emerge, we might re-envision ways of facing symbols of power, facing symbols of domination. And that's it.
Yeah, it's definitely not conclusive, although you may be finished with your slides. I really like how you're getting into this multiplicity of interpretation, while using the reference of opacity versus transparency. What it feels like is that there has been a presentation, a very rich presentation of ways in which meaning or understanding or even attachment to a work can be so very different viewer by viewer. And it's wonderful to have your perception of that, to say, there's not a singularity about this multiplicity, which is very much, an outcome of our diversity as well. Yeah. Marsha, did you want to speak into that? You're on mute. Sorry.
Yes, sorry about that. I'm excited about Paulo's contribution because I don't see, what we have shared as being, so far removed from each other at all. I think we're both attending to, epistemological and ontological strategies, for approaching the way we live and move and be in our spaces. And so, of course, to think about to invoke Glissant's idea of opacity is really to say that, these artists are thinking about strategies that resist easy readings, facile readings, about who we are and about who we could be. And that certainly plays into looking at a resource such as memory, claiming a resource such as memory. Memories are never easy. That's a complex material with which to work. And we see our artists in this art fair really attempting to grapple with the nuances of memory, with memory as something opaque as well. And how do you represent that in a way that, again, that is not simplistic, that doesn't offer a stereotypical or very simple representation or understanding of this space that we are in. And so I see, notions of memory and thinking about veiling and opacity and protection and so on as being, working in tandem, working together as strategies for, as aesthetic strategies for thinking about ourselves in this space.
And to remember that we didn't, as a group of curators, we didn't shape our booths with one overarching theme or statement as much as we developed our booths with a real intention of disrupting the limited perception of the art that kids created in and from our region. And so very simple, and then looking towards, developed execution, articulate messaging, articulate creative expressions, and then as Paulo's indicated as well, when we were offline, was thinking about the time period that, like, that work that the last work that you have was dated 1990, two works that have just been completed the other day, and made specifically for the fair. So it's really interesting that we can examine that sense of whether we're saying examining the theme of memory, but just sort of examining this multiplicity. I don't know if that's a word that either of you would hinge onto, but just that that we have this discourse and it's available to us, and we were able to shape that discourse really quickly. This project just started in March. and then all content was up by mid-May. So it's very interesting that we've been able to almost at the end be able to pull together these narratives that weren't the driving part at the beginning.
Mhm.
And again, as I said, I thought both of your selections for how you wanted to ground your conversation was as if we had crafted this through Lens Walcott, through Lens Glisson in a very intentional way. And I know that those were referentials, but that wasn't actually how we shaped this.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Okay, well, we are just ever so slightly over. I wanted to, we wanted to have a talk with the three of us a little bit about what happens next. And Paolo's comment question to me was, well, Lisa, what were your goals? What has been realized? What challenges? And we had three very clear goals. One, which is a part of this program, which is to to make people aware of who are the players behind the scene, who are our artists, talk a little bit more about our projects, make sure there's an understanding in terms of our history, whether it's as collectors or the development of collections. And so our program has really helped to augment that. And then our second goal, of course, was to be in a retail space where we could show and sell and develop some very critically necessary capital. And the third is to galvanize our relationships. Each of these galleries, curatorial agencies are essentially operating unto itself within its own community. The Black Pony Gallery, Susie Wong Presents are the two spaces that exist entirely online, and Sourgrass is sort of emerging in the context of this fair. Other galleries have had 30 years, 25 years experience, and some like Churn has just opened. So we've all come together now underneath this umbrella called the Atlantic World Art Fair, and my goal and hope is that between this event and the next iteration is that we will continue to develop our partnerships and opportunities together, and find ways to keep pushing this exposure quotient that needs to happen. The only way for Paolo to now know and perhaps be considering, and Marsha yourself too, of another curatorial project is now you perhaps have access to some more artists to be thinking about and considering. I mean, that is enormous. Paulo, for you to say you embarked on this journey as a foreigner, experiencing this space as if it was completely new, and you really did have some wonderful discoveries. That is precious. That's precious news, because we can't actually go forward in our imaginations and goals and visions as curators and gallery owners, saying we hope our artists get we hope our artists get selected for the Venice Biennale, or they're sent off to Munich. How else will the world know us unless we continue to do this really good, rich work? So I haven't got a list of challenges as much as all I see are opportunities. And as I mentioned offline, one of the challenges that's being faced is, as I'm selling work, my printer's saying, I am worried that you're going to max out my available paper, canvas, and ink. And because of this global pandemic, certain global supplies are no longer available. And so now we're in this, okay, we've created this wonderful entity. We're showcasing a catalog. Let's hope we can actually now get to selling, shipping, and get it there. And that the collectors will have the patience to manage that with us. Yeah.
And what I feel is that when one thing I learned a lot with the region and its thinkers and artists is that it's not only important to be concerned about the point of origin of things and trajectories, but also and especially about how they contaminate and change and transform each other through time and through mobility and communication. So it feels like this project has a lot of space to transform and becomes more and more hybrid, as you were mentioning at some point, hybrid and making occasions for people to actually meet together, but also forums and spaces for them to see each other's production online and have conversations and so on and so forth, because this shape shifting of opportunities is immense. And on my own experience, I can tell that if there wasn't a place like Tilting Axis 2 years ago, when I was well, I don't know, 3 years ago now, but when we are starting the São Paulo Biennial process, we wanted to make sure we had a good look in the Caribbean region. It's never enough, but at least to make an effort, but we had to have a place to start. So I had some connections because I had attended to one to Nexus, then there was another one to happen, so I had the chance to go and meet other artists and thinkers and researchers. And I feel that the Atlantic World Art Fair can also be a place like that, in the sense that it brings together people that feel they have the interest, but they need also to have some opportunity to begin or resume conversation.
And absolutely, and that's and also something that we had talked about offline was to be thinking about this fair as its own very unique project that doesn't have to follow any of the other ways of fairs that have existed or exist right now. We can do our own thing. We can create what I describe as a hybrid, where the next iteration will be simultaneously online and on island. And ideally, we find our ways around that, and we're all able to continue to evolve these ideas. Absolutely. Yeah.
For me, I think what is particularly generative, rather than thinking about thematics, is to think about questions. Paulo spoke about, the importance of being able to have dialogue, conversations, and so on. And I think a platform like this, to have it be animated by a number of questions, allows for, the beauty of unpredictable outcomes. Something very organic.
Yep.
A generative can emerge, rather than something prescriptive.
Yep. And this process to today has been extremely democratic. All of the partners have all played a fundamental role in what we've shaped here. And I don't think that that's usual. I don't think that's the common way in which fairs and products of this scale get actually developed. So we will see how we evolve. I'm grateful for the comments of support in the comments. Thank you all so very much. I'm not seeing any particular question arising as much as I'm seeing the gratitude, which makes me feel like we're at the right place to conclude. Thank you both so much. I don't want to cut you off if you have some final words.
Well, thanks.
Well, I'd love to make sure that you stay within our inner circle as we move forward. And your expertise, your advice, your insights, all of these, please, I hope that we can continue the dialogue. I'm so honored to spend some time with you and to meet you. And this fair has been able to present some really interesting opportunities of engagement like this. So thank you again for your time.
Congrats to you and all of the galleries, the various platforms represented over this last month. And of course, it's been my pleasure to be with you both today.
Thank you so much. We are going to conclude with what I would call the credit line. I have had a colleague, Letitia, who's been in the back scenes of this fair. And thank you, Letitia. She's put together a third reel, which acknowledges all of the partners and all of the artists. So we're going to be removed off screen and let that run completely. And I'll just finish off now by saying thank you all for joining us. I hope that you continue to share the experience with sharing the YouTube channel, to share the online catalog, and keep the spirit of the contemporary art movement in the Atlantic world in your hearts and in your minds. And yeah, thank you all so very much.